Comment imaginer une spiritualité au féminin? Ou comment redonner à la spiritualité toute sa dimension féminine? En allant à la rencontre de femmes qui aujourd'hui l'incarnent, à l'image de Tsultrim Allione. Cette enseignante américaine a eu très jeune l'intuition qu'à la sagesse du bouddhisme tibétain, auquel elle a été formée, il fallait associer la sagesse occidentale, qui pour elle s'exprimait dans la psychologie et notamment dans les travaux de Carl Gustav Jung et de Laura et Fritz Perls. Donc très jeune, elle a eu cette intuition qu'il fallait regarder et tenir ensemble ces deux traditions de manière à ce qu'effectivement ce que voulait transmettre le bouddhisme tibétain, c'est-à-dire la possibilité d'une libération de nos souffrances, de nos peurs, de nos angoisses, de notre mal-être, soit entendable et soit accessible pour les Occidentaux. Au début du XXIe siècle, Lama Tsultrim Allione a forgé une pratique qui s'appelle « Nourrir ses démons » et qui est justement tout à fait imprégnée de ces deux traditions. Nourrir ses démons est une pratique qui consiste à travailler avec nos peurs, à les personnifier de manière à pouvoir dialoguer avec elles et les transformer en alliés plutôt que de les fuir. Alors cette pratique, elle est très puissante thérapeutiquement à un niveau individuel, mais Lama Tsultrim Allione nous explique également qu'elle est très puissante à un niveau collectif. En effet, comment travailler sur nos démons collectifs? Et on peut se poser la question, que serait une société qui, au lieu de fuir ses peurs et ses ennemis, au lieu de les combattre, de les emprisonner, de les tuer, commencer à entamer un dialogue avec eux, commencer à les écouter, commencer à essayer de comprendre ce qui pourrait apaiser leur colère. Alors ça peut paraître un peu fou comme projet, un peu utopique, mais on peut quand même se poser la question quand on voit le désastre de siècles et de siècles de combats stériles que nous menons. Thank you so much, Lama Tsultrim Allione, to save time for us. You just started an European tour. Yes. You just finished a wonderful 3 days retreat here in Prague. Is it pleasant for you to teach, to come in Europe and to teach to Europeans?
I lived in Italy for 7 years. And so whenever I come to Europe, I feel like I'm a little bit at home. You know, it's like, especially in Italy, I'm like, it's a home for me. And I really like to get out of the United States once in a while to get a different perspective. And yeah, I like to come to Europe.
I believe your first time you meet Tibetan tradition, it was through the cover of a Carl Gustav Jung book. Is it right?
I was young. I was maybe 15, 16. And my grandfather was a professor at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so he lived in Cambridge, and I used to go visit him. And then I would go to the Harvard Coop, they called it, this big store in the center of Harvard Square. And I liked to go to the books, to see the books. And there was this book. I remember it being on a table, so I could see the cover. And on the cover was a mandala, a Tibetan mandala. And I'd never seen one before. And I realized immediately it wasn't normal art, that it had some purpose. And so I bought the book. It was called Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. So I bought it, and it just was published, because I looked up when that was published. I think it was 1963, maybe. So in that book, he shows a lot of different images from cultures around the world. And the mandalas were one of these images that he showed. And so I started looking at the mandalas, and then I realized, oh, these are meant to look at, to go into on some level. And it's not just like a painting for beauty or something, that it actually does something to your mind to look at them. It was like a kind of memory also when I saw that. And then I was a painter. And so I wanted to learn to paint mandalas. And so when I was 19, I had the opportunity to go to India and to meet the Tibetan people in Dharamsala, first in Kathmandu and then in Dharamsala. And so that was the first thing I asked, how can I learn to paint a mandala? And then I went to see a Lama to ask for that possibility. And he said, well, it would take you about a year to just learn how to measure for the mandala. Just the measurements, not even beginning to paint. And I was 19, and I was, no, I'm not going to do that. I wasn't that patient. But that was kind of my door into Tibetan Buddhism. At first, I studied very traditional Tibetan Buddhism. As you said, I studied in India and Nepal, and with the teachers coming out of Tibet at that time, like Kalu Rinpoche and Dujim Rinpoche, Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, 16th Karmapa. There was a Lama in Kathmandu named Sapchu Rinpoche, and my meditation teacher, Abu Rinpoche. So very traditional. I learned to read Tibetan, and so I was doing it according to the tradition. And then I realized that it was really important not to leave the emotional development behind, that there needed to be a parallel development, because also I saw my friends go into the 3-year retreat and then come out, and they basically had the same problems. And there was something that wasn't developing, even though they were doing so much meditation practice. And I was, after 4 years, I gave back my vows and I became a mother. And so I encountered all kinds of emotions. And I realized also for me, there was something that wasn't developing or wasn't resolving itself in just doing meditation. And I felt there needs to be a parallel development, which I'm sure you as a therapist agree with. And I saw this with other people as well.
That's very interesting.
So, yeah. And I always had that feeling, actually. My mother came to visit me when I was in Nepal, when I was a nun, and I was still practicing very traditionally. And I said to her, I think the West has wisdom also, and that wisdom is in psychology. When I come back to the West, I want to make a retreat center that has Western psychology and Tibetan Buddhist practice. So this was very early, and so that was in 1970. Right after I was ordained, I told her that, and she wrote it in a letter to my great aunt. And then she kept a copy of that letter, which I still have, saying that I wanted to do this parallel study, I guess you could say.
Feeding your demons is one of the results of this work you did. Can you tell us the story of Feeding Your Demons?
Originally, I developed Feeding Your Demons as a way to teach the traditional practice of Chöd. And in the Chöd practice, you turn your body into nectar and you feed different guests. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas you feed, and the protectors, and then also you feed the disease-bearing beings, debt holders, and other kind of obstacle makers. And so when I was teaching it, in the chöd practice, you use a drum and a bell, and you sing it in Tibetan. And so it would be very easy to kind of have it be almost like a foreign ornament that you put on, and oh, I sing this song in Tibetan, but not really have personal meaning. And so I thought, how can I give this some personal meaning? And that's how I developed Feeding Your Demons, is that, okay, what are my demons? Not just a Buddhist concept like the ego, but what are my actual demons? And from a Buddhist point of view, the demons are anything that blocks you from being completely awake and free. And so those issues are personal. Like, your demons are different than my demons. And yet, there's similarities. And so I began to use it as a kind of like a teaching tool to teach the chöd practice. And then what happened was a lot of my students were psychotherapists, and they took this little method that I was teaching and they started using it with their clients. And then they came back to me and they said, you know, that demon work that you were teaching, they said, that's all my clients want anymore. They don't want to do other kinds of therapy. They just want that work because it's so helpful for them.
It's so helpful, and as a therapist and as a meditation teacher, I felt in love with this process, with this meditation you created, Feeding Your Demon, following the Mahasi Lab John teaching. I love this practice because it fully assumes its healing aspect.
Yeah, and the fact that the demon transforms into an ally is really important, because it's not just like you're meeting your shadow and you have a conversation with your shadow. You actually, that very thing, the demon itself, becomes the ally. The energy that's locked up in our demons becomes the ally. So there's a complete transformation.
And when I discovered this work, new work, when I read your books in French, Nourrir, c'est démons, and Wisdom Rising is translated Le pouvoir du féminin sacré. Suddenly, I discovered there are powerful women. I was so naive, but I discovered that, and it makes me so joyful.
Yeah, I think as women we need that. We need to have models of other women to follow or to inspire us, or to see how she lived her life or dealt with things. I didn't have that either. That's why I wrote Women of Wisdom, because I had been practicing then. When I wrote Women of Wisdom was 1984, so I'd been practicing for 15 years already, and I had never heard of a woman teacher at all. I mean, I had heard of Yeshe Tsogyal with Guru Rinpoche, but it was always women who were like the partner of a male teacher, and therefore they were important because of him, basically. Although, of course, Yeshe Tsogyal was really amazing in herself, but that's how she's known. And so, for me, when I lost a child, I lost my daughter, Chiara, when she was 2.5 months old. And when that happened, it was like a descent for me. And the stories of the male teachers weren't helping me. And so I felt I have to there must be some women, there must be some stories of women. And that began my search, that became my first book. So it was really out of the death of a daughter that these stories of women came. So that's kind of interesting, like it's in a way the loss of the feminine, and then to find it in another form. In a way, Tara was like the first feminist because of what she did and what she said so long ago. And really, like, you know, we talk about women's liberation, but this real liberation, it's not just political liberation or sociological liberation, but actual liberation. And the Tara, I mean, that story of Tara comes from probably the 700s, something like that. And it was at this moment when Tantra, Vajrayana, came into Buddhism. And when Vajrayana came into Buddhism was the first time that we have female Buddhas and women teachers. There were important women in early Buddhism, and the nuns, and also some of the patrons of the Buddha and so on. But with Vajrayana, all of a sudden, you have these women teachers. And that story of Tara, can I tell that story?
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
So I was just thinking about it recently. So Tara is a princess, and her name is Wisdom Moon, and she's progressing on her path. She's coming close to enlightenment, and her teacher says to her, "Oh, Wisdom Moon, it's so sad that you can't reach full enlightenment because you're in the body of a woman. You'll have to come back in the body of a man to reach full enlightenment." And Tara had been studying Buddhism, so she said, any notion of gender is just for fools. But since so many have reached enlightenment in the body of a man, I will always return as a woman, and I will reach full and complete enlightenment in the female body. And then she did. And she's always come back in the female form. So for me, it's like absolute and relative truth, you know, and this is the absolute truth, this is the relative truth. And so she's holding the absolute truth of gender is irrelevant, which we know, you know, on some level gender is irrelevant, and it's just based on social factors, etc. So that's absolute truth. But then on a relative level, there's no women, so I will do that. And plus, she's fast moving, you know, and she's green, like green Tara. I mean, Tara's in many colors, but the most probably well known is green Tara. And she's an activist. She's swift moving. I mean, her sort of epithet is fast, you know, speedy arrival. And she's from the forest. So I like to say Green Tara, she's from the Green Party. She's an activist from the Green Party. And she's a female liberator. That's what Tara Drolma is. Drol is liberation and Ma is feminine. So I love that she held that sort of bigger view of irrelevancy of gender, because I feel that too. You know, nature of mind does not have a gender. But at the relative level, there are issues and it does matter. And so we have to hold both those truths. And so for me, I never had the idea to focus on women, or like, I wasn't like a feminist or anything like that. But then when my daughter died and I needed those stories, I started reading women's spirituality, which was in the 80s. There was a whole field of women's spirituality that was developing, particularly in the United States and in England. I don't know about France, if it was happening there. It definitely wasn't happening in Italy, because when I would say women's spirituality in Italy, they would say, you know, especially the feminists would say, oh, no, no church, no church. I was like, no, it's not the church, it's women, it's spirituality, it's not in the church. And they were like, there's no spirituality besides the church. So anyway, there was a whole field of women's spirituality developing, and I started reading some of those writers, and it was just such an awakening for me to read, like, oh, you know, all these religions were created by men, for men. And then men were the ones that were empowered within it. What would spirituality be if it was, at least women had a voice in the creation, or if it was created by women? How would it be different? And I used to do that as an exercise when I would teach. Sometimes I would say, okay, now imagine a temple or a church created by women for the feminine. What would it look like? And how would it be? And just like, wow, how could that be different? And I think that's an exercise that is interesting to think about.
And liberating too. I believe Mashik's approach of engaging and feeding the enemy provides a revolutionary paradigm shift from domination to tolerance and integration. And I think that's very interesting too, because we are clearly in a world led by domination, and we would like, we dream about tolerance and integration.
The other thing that I talk about in the book is how there's no end when you start trying to get rid of the demon or kill the demon. There's just more. Or if you try to repress it, it just makes more. And we see this with terrorists. And I'm just thinking about what's happening right now, you know, in Israel and Gaza and so on, that is this going to create peace? I don't think so. The military solution is not the solution. And what if these people really started talking and listening to each other, what they need? Oh, you need that? Okay, I need this. Is there some way we can make this work? I was also just saying to them that I was looking here in Prague at they have a display of armor, you know, in the castle, in the castle wall. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, we really haven't progressed. It's like, it's really, now they're just figured out a way to kill more people at the same time than just on a horse, you know, trying to kill one person at a time. And how humanity has developed such complex, brilliant ways to be more healthy, more comfortable, make life easier, and so on, but hasn't really developed at all in terms of dealing with emotions and anger and all the things that lead to war. It's like, it's the same, even though so much time has passed. I mean, maybe we have some developments like the United Nations and things like that, but yeah, humanity really needs to try something else, something different, because it's not working, what we're doing.
And your proposal is not fighting, but feeding our demons.
Feeding and listening to each other, which is what you do with the demon. You listen, what do you need? And then you think, how can I provide that? Yeah, feeding, not fighting. And in a way, that's a very feminine metaphor.